In this video, we're going to go over English and French language settings in your account. And we're actually going to follow the support documentation for the same settings, but because there are many settings involved, this video helps you understand these settings by showing you all these options on the screen. All right, so let's start with the language setting option, French on or off. And that's going to be under account settings on the language tab. This checkbox will control if the account will have bilingual settings enabled or not. If this is turned off, then all the French translations of various settings throughout the interface will be hidden. So that way you're only dealing with English content. If you want to show French content and send emails to contacts in French, then turn this on, and after this a number of settings will be available for you in French. One is a default language, which determines how to deal with contexts where the language setting is not explicitly set to English or French. Are we going to treat them as English language preference or French language preference? Then the account name itself, the website and the logo, they all have a French language equivalent that you can add right here. There are two other settings that are now also available in French. So let's give that a save. One of them is going to be subscriptions, because these are contact facing. Your contacts will see subscriptions. Now these subscriptions will have a French name and a French description that you can add here. So we filled out here the French name for the subscription. And the other option is the mandatory settings, mandatory content settings, which not everybody uses, but if you use mandatory emails, then the mandatory email description will also have a French language translation area where you can put in the reason of why your contacts are receiving mandatory messages from you. So that's where you add the French translations. So now let's see how you can set contacts language preferences. And that's going to be under the Contacts tab. We're going to look at just any sample contact here, and you will see a language field, and this determines the language preference of this individual. So this can be either English or French. By default, it's going to be set to unknown, and in that case, the default language will control the language. You can change it here manually, but most of the time you would want to change this in bulk as you're importing contacts. So let's have a look at that. It's actually on this support document. It gives you an example of how this works. When you're importing your contacts, just add a column in your import file in the spreadsheet, call it language, and you can use either of these four different values, either spell out word English or French, or you can use EN or FR for each contact. And as you map these fields in step 2 of the import process, you want to map your language column to the language field in the Envoke database, and this will assign those contacts to those languages as you import them. So that's how you set them through importing. Now, if contacts are added using the API programmatically, then the same field, you want to use the language field with the API, use EN or FR. If contacts are added using sign-up forms on their own, that's going to be under forms. And we have two examples here, the English and the French form. So the English form, every time someone fills this out, they'll automatically be set with language preference equals English. If it's a French form, then if they fill it out, in the background, their language preference will automatically be set to French. And the way you control that on the form is going to be under the language settings right here. I change it to French, and this will control the language preference field in the background. This is also control the display language of the subscriptions on the form. In some settings you have to manually update, So for example, this text here, or even the label on the subscribe button, that's something that you can translate right here in the form editor. Okay, so let's look at the email preferences page, which is going to be the page where people arrive after they click the update preferences link in the footer of the email that you send to them. Okay, so let's close this page and go to email preferences. So this is where your contacts can update their optional subscriptions. So in this example, we have 3 different subscriptions to choose from. And right now, they're all shown in English, along with all the other content on this page that's shown in English. The English version of the logo shows, which is linked to the English version of the website. But because we have French settings enabled, there's a toggle here where contacts can change the language on this page. And if I click French, then everything here will instantly be shown in French. So that's the subscriptions translations we talked about earlier, and all the system generated content will also be in French. On this page, there is also a setting about language updates. You can control whether or not you want to allow your contacts to update their language preference on their own using this checkbox on the side. Okay, so finally, and this is the last step, is how you can send emails in English or French, and that's going to be on their messages. So if you open a message here, we'll see on the recipients tab where you select the audience, the recipients the email is going to, you have a language setting option at the very bottom. So the way this works is first you select contacts based on the subscription, either sent to everybody regardless of subscription, but most often you will select the subscription first. So this is going to go to Student Life newsletter subscribers, and now it shows me that means there are 33 contacts selected, 15 of them actually unsubscribed, so in the end 18 emails will be sent. I have now the option to narrow down this selection using tags. This is completely optional, but I could, for example, set it to staff, and that will narrow down even more. So now it's only staff who are subscribed to Student Life who will receive this message. And this is where the language sector comes in. This is where I select the language setting of recipients. If I leave it blank, language selection will be ignored. It'll be sent to everybody that you selected up here, regardless of their language field. But if I set it to French, for example, then all of a sudden I see this number is changed, and 4 contacts are excluded because their language preference does not meet this criteria, which is French in this example. If I set it to English, then there'll be 19 contacts in this example excluded because they are not set to English. If I leave it blank, then it's going to be a different setting. It's going to use it's going to not use the language field at all because we're ignoring this setting. So this is where you select the language preference of your audience that you send messages to. There's another language setting, which is going to be under the Configure tab. And this is the message language, not the recipient's language. And this controls the translation of the merge fields, as well as the background, the HTML code that makes up this email. There's a setting in there that designates a message to be English or French, and that is used by screen readers. So in this example, we have set this to French. So that means if I go look at this message in the preview, the name of the subscription is shown in French. So that's translated automatically because that's a merge field. Now the text around it, that's something that you can edit anytime. If you click here, you would want to put in the French wording here that you'd like to use. You can edit that freely in messages, but the merge fields will be pulled from those corresponding fields that I showed you earlier in the video for mandatory reason, subscriptions, and brand settings. If I go and change this to English, then the description of that subscription will show the English version. Now, if this message is a mandatory message, English version, then I see the mandatory text that's in here in English. And if I switch this to French, then the mandatory setting wording will change to French as well. And this part of the sentence you can edit directly from the message editor down below. Okay, so these are all the language settings that exist in the account. There are a number of settings to fill out, but the good news is these are all by and large one-time settings. Once you establish the language field names, once you add the account, the French language logo, and import your contacts with their corresponding languages, then going forward it requires very little maintenance. All right, so hope this was helpful. And as usual, if you have any questions, let us know in chat support, and we'll be here to help you out.